Fem w STEM. Dlaczego dziewczyny idą do nauki? In this episode of Fem in STEM, or as we say in Polish, Fem w STEM, the Perspektywy Education Foundation podcast, quantum physics and quantum life. And boy, oh boy, what an exciting and inspiring story it is. We have Cierra Choucair in our virtual studio, entrepreneur, deep tech journalist, and analyst at the Quantum Insider. I told Cierra she's like a qubit, adaptive and resilient. But above all, she's an incredibly interesting and inspiring human being. And you know what? You can meet her in person and other guests of this podcast during the Perspektywy Women in Tech Summit that takes place in Warsaw on the 4th and the 5th of June 2025. This is not only the biggest conference and career fair for women in tech in Europe, but it's also the most empowering. You are invited. Come and listen. And remember, in quantum physics, the particle is in two places at once, yet you are still stuck in traffic. My name is Magda Gacyk, and I have a pleasure of hosting this podcast. So let's start with the question about our times, and if we can say that AI, based on this binary code, traditional 0-1 code, is passé and long live quantum intelligence, or is it too early? Maybe we are not at the door of quantum computer times yet.
That's a great question. And so, what I would say is, I do believe it is a bit too early to define this as the time of the quantum computer. Rather, I think we're in a bit of a pre era, which I would call, or I would define as the development of the quantum ecosystem that will support the development of a large scale quantum computer. And so there are a lot of pieces that go into readying the infrastructure that will support such a move from classical compute to quantum compute. And when it comes to the future of intelligence, I feel very strongly that what we will see is a trifecta. So I believe that supercompute, AI, and quantum will be able to work together and support one another in order to bring about the next era of intelligence. And so that's something that I'm actually very interested in and excited to see as we continue to develop both technologies, AI and quantum computing.
So let's start with the smallest part of the whole equation, with qubits, because it seems like everything starts and ends with qubits, and you write about it extensively in the daily qubit that you established. And as fascinating and full of potential as qubits are, they are also unstable and prone to
Absolutely.
reacting to influences, like your stereotypical moody teenager, right? So will we find a way to stabilize qubits?
What's really interesting about the use of qubits is that there are many different modalities in quantum computing. And so we have the superconducting, which is, of course, the most well known when we talk about quantum computing, but you also have quantum computing with ions and you have neutral atom computing. And so the qubits are the core of the quantum computer. And yes, they are very difficult to work with and they love to fall out of coherence, which ultimately makes the answers that we get from quantum computers unreliable, which is why we've seen this rise in error correction as well as logical qubits, so that we're able to extract reliable answers from quantum computers. The problem is that we can't yet do this at scale because they are so fragile. And so that really is this hurdle that we're trying to overcome as an industry. Now, that being said, something that I find very, very interesting about quantum technology is that as quantum computers enter more and more into mainstream communications and media, there is more funding that is being funneled into the development of quantum technology. And so the more that this money is funneled into this really specific area of research, the more that we're able to develop more reliable hardware, because there is a lot of movement that's being made with quantum matter or the different parts that make up the quantum computers themselves. And so I see it as this really incredible feedback loop that's happening in real time, where as we work with quantum computers, there is more research being done on the pieces that make up the quantum computer. And the more that we learn about those pieces, the more that we learn about quantum mechanics itself, the more we'll be better equipped to develop better, reliable qubits.
That's interesting because as we talk, there are news in the media about new quantum computers. For example, today, India has just unveiled its first full stack quantum computing system.
Mhm.
And you say there are more and more money in it, meaning we are globally not only in AI race, but also in quantum race.
Yes, yes, absolutely we are.
So who is now in the forefront?
That's a really great question, and I think it's very difficult to answer because it's not easy to compare number of qubits. We can't just
Mm.
compare number of qubits because that doesn't necessarily translate to most reliable output, and it absolutely does not translate to highest impact of quantum application. And so when it comes to who is ahead, it is such a difficult question to answer. However, there are national and regional ecosystems out there that are doing a really phenomenal job about combining, because it takes a combination, right? We need to think about multiple pieces when it comes to quantum infrastructure. It's not just the hardware itself. And so we want to look at the places where not only are we developing hardware, we're working towards developing reliable hardware, but are we conducting case studies and trials of quantum applications that have real world impact and benefit society in a positive way? And the other side of this is, of course, education and workforce development. And so, how are we putting money and effort towards creating resources that make quantum technology itself more accessible, but also the education more accessible? And are we putting the programs in place to support the development of this quantum workforce? Because we have students that are in school right now pursuing PhDs in physics and quantum, but we can't just rely on PhD students. We need an entire workforce. So we need people who can sell quantum technology, people who can talk about quantum technology. And so the places that will excel in the development of quantum technology will adequately address each of these things. So it's the hardware, it's the education, and it's the applications. I think that the US and Europe, which is very vague, I understand, but Europe as a whole, have put a lot of
Mhm.
effort towards addressing each of these. Um, and so it's just really difficult to say at this point, but I would say in order to name the person who comes out on top, it's going to be someone who addressed each of those.
So we are talking about positive impact, but with the AI, and I'm guessing with quantum computing too soon,
Hmm.
we will have not only boomers but also doomers.
Yeah.
So what is the potential negative impact? Annihilation, like total
Yeah.
annihilation? Okay.
That's a great question. And so, okay, there are two things that really come to mind for me here. There are two things that we need to be aware of as we actively develop this technology, because, as always, responsible technology development is paramount. And so there is the threat to national security that is probably talked about the most. And so you always hear about how quantum computers can break RSA encryption. We don't yet have a device that is capable of doing that at such a scale that it would be doom and gloom. However, the possibility, the potential is there. And so what's happening is this knowledge is really feeding the other negative aspect of quantum technology. And that aspect, to me personally, is that what we've seen with the development of AI technology is there's this widening gap between those who have access to AI and the tools, to AI tools and the benefits that come with it, and those who do not. And there's also a widening gap in education. And so with quantum, we are seeing and will continue to see the same thing. And so when we think about the two put together, if this is a threat to national security and there is this gap between who has access and who does not, then those two things combined together can it can be very detrimental for certain nations that weren't given or didn't have the resources to get the access to quantum technology. And so for me, those are the two biggest concerns that we have.
We touched on your biggest concerns. And then my next question is also about your personal view of the quantum realm. Do you imagine your own future in a quantum era? And if so, how
Absolutely.
would it look like?
Oh, I love that. So 100%, I do imagine a quantum future, and it is something that I feel so passionate about contributing to. I want to see this be a reality. And my hope is, if I'm very optimistic, so let me put on my optimism, my hope is that we're able to come together as a global community and develop this technology together so that there is positive impact for society. And how I envision that is I know that so the UN puts out the Sustainable Development Goals. You know, we need accessible education, we need clean drinking water. We have all of these goals that we're working towards, and we want to reach them by 2030. And so I see quantum technology as this technology that could potentially accelerate our path from where we are now to actually realizing some of those goals that in an unprecedented way. And so my hope is that instead of siloing this technology because of concerns related to national security, I hope that we're able to come together and actually develop it so that we can reach these goals, such as can we create personalized, accessible education? Can we get clean drinking water? Can we use it in agriculture? Can we do all these things using quantum technology to benefit humans? And so that is the ideal quantum future I envision, and I would like to actively work towards. Now, of course, reality tends to play out differently, but I would like to remain optimistic on this.
Before we skip to the future, let's stay for a moment in the present. And my question would be, we must backpedal here. How does a quantum computer look like right now? Because what we see, and usually what we associate with the quantum computer, is what we see on the pictures, and we see something that is like a very elaborate modern chandelier, and we think, oh, that's a quantum computer, and it's not.
The chandelier quantum computer has really taken over most of the pictures that we see surrounding a quantum computer. So the other style that you would see is more of a tabletop display of like mirrors and lasers, and it looks like any experimental physics lab in my personal
Mhm.
experience, but I have not actually seen a quantum computer in person. That's a goal of mine. I've only seen it in images. And I will say that we do tend to see the chandelier more than anything else. And so, and this brings up a really interesting point is that the technology itself is very limited in its access, like the public is very limited to its access of quantum technology. And so not only can they not see the technology in person, most of us cannot, it's very difficult to visualize the concepts behind quantum computers such as superposition and entanglement because these we do not see examples of these in our everyday classical reality. And so it is very interesting. So quantum computers do not all look like golden chandeliers, even though I do believe they're very beautiful. Um,
Mhm.
and there are also other topics that I think are really interesting when it comes to the visualization of quantum technology that should be more that I would like to see more solutions to is how do we visualize concepts that are abstract and how do we get more exposure to this technology so that we can incorporate it into our everyday understanding and have a better chance at being a quantum aware community.
So I will follow with the question, can we understand the quantum computing?
There are some really interesting studies that have been done specifically teaching high school level students quantum topics through visual strategy, through strategies that are not, I don't want to say not as math intensive. The mathematics is still there, but tend to, instead of the traditional way of teaching quantum mechanics in university, they have tried teaching high school students through more visual techniques. And what they have found is that if they test these students at the end of the study, that they will perform more stronger than university level students have. I do think that the potential to truly understand quantum is there, and keeping in mind that there is still more that we need to understand around the theory itself, but I do think the potential is there. I do fully advocate for principles of quantum mechanics to be introduced at earlier levels. And so there is a decent amount of people that are working towards advocating for K through 12 education that includes exposure to quantum information theory and quantum science. And I think that this is really, really important. And I would add on here, what I also advocate for is we need to introduce computer science at earlier levels as well. So I think this is something that is another concern to me. Like I mentioned before, there's this widening gap between education, and I feel that we are so behind on teaching computer science, and we are also behind on teaching quantum concepts. And so I feel that if we move those to earlier levels, earlier exposure in education, that we will have a better chance of creating a workforce that does understand quantum mechanics on a deeper level.
So are you saying that we are actually slowly quantum evolving?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that was a question about the whole humanity. But asking about you, when did this fascination with everything quantum start for you?
I'll have to go back to university for this one. Now, when I first went to university, I thought that I was going to become a doctor, that I was going to go pre-med, become a doctor, and I saw becoming a doctor as this great intersection between using the scientific method while also giving back to community, giving back to the community in an impactful way. What happened when I actually got to university is I ended up on a scholarship that allowed me to work in a research lab, and it was specifically a chemistry research lab. And I fell in love with the act of doing research, of being very involved in the process of scientific discovery. And I realized that that's where my passion really was. And at the time, I fell in love with chemistry. And I had taken a physics course because it was required for pre-med students. And it was the first course in my entire life that I failed. And I was actually very traumatized by that because I thought, first, this is a terrible subject. I don't know anyone studies it. And second, I just don't understand how I possibly failed this course. And so a year later, I would retake physics after I came to terms with what had happened. And I approached it from a much different perspective. And so I realized that if I looked at my previous courses, especially in chemistry even, is I really relied on my ability to memorize facts and memorize an equation and then just plug in numbers to the equation. And I wasn't very effectively learning the material. And so physics is different because you can't just rely on memorization. You can't just rely on plugging numbers into an equation. You have to understand a system and the forces that work within a system. And this requires a deeper level of understanding. And so once I realized this, I was able to really go at the subject with a different perspective. And the second time I took physics, it was much more successful. And I also remembered reading the memoirs of Richard Feynman, who was a very interesting character. And I remember reading about the double slit experiment that was first done. And I thought, how incredible to be at that point in time, to think that you understand the nature of reality, and then to find this discovery that completely upends everything we know about how our reality works. And so there's this really great analogy that I had also come across during this time. It was a book from Stephen Hawking, and he talked about the goldfish and the goldfish bowl, and
Mm-hmm.
how to the goldfish everything appears distorted and round, globular. And we know, being on the other side of the goldfish bowl, that that's not how reality appears. And so I began thinking it's really interesting to me to think that we are in some sort of goldfish bowl of our own, and that there are so many things we have yet to know that when we do find them, it will completely change the story that we've told ourselves about the world. All of these things happening at once, going back through physics and loving it, and and really thinking about what it means to pursue scientific discovery and what it means about the stories we tell ourselves is where I really started to fall in love with quantum, especially because it is so different from the reality that we interact with every single day. It happens on this level that we don't actively see. And I just feel strongly that the more we understand quantum, there are going to be major pieces of the puzzle that start to come to light. And so that's where I first fell in love with quantum.
But was it like just a bed of roses, passion, fascination, or was it a little bit of a bumpy road?
I think the beauty of life really is that it's never a bed of roses. There's challenges that we have to overcome, and it's those challenges that really illuminate the joy in other parts of life that really make us grateful for these other parts. And so my journey from quantum was very much a bumpy road. And so even though I fell in love with quantum in school and I had this very deep rooted passion to pursue it, and I imagined myself getting my PhD. I wanted to be a professor of theoretical physics. I wanted to work with students to inspire that same curiosity and passion that I had. That's not what happened. So I completed roughly 3 of the 4 years required for my degree, which was engineering physics specifically. And I actually had to make the very difficult decision to walk away from my education at that point in time. And the reason was that I had come to be in a relationship that was toxic and abusive. And I'm sure that many women can identify with this. And at the time, I had a 4-year-old daughter. And so I remember looking at her and thinking that I could pursue my degree. I could continue in this situation and pursue my degree and be this role model for her. But will she walk away with this? I was afraid that her idea of what was love would be tainted by that experience if I stayed. And so I felt that it was important for me to walk away from that situation, and in doing so, it meant that I needed to become financially independent for both of us to support both of our futures. And I could not put myself through school. So I went immediately into industry to pursue a career so that I could support both of us and provide for both of us. And that did not look like physics. I actually became a store manager of a Starbucks, and I worked in the food industry for several years. And during this time that I worked in the food industry, I learned a lot about leadership and working with different people and just what it takes to run a business, to manage your profit and loss statement. And it was a very, very valuable experience. And there were parts of it that I loved, but there was always this part of me, this lingering part of me that could not let go of, I'm not working in science and technology.
Mm-hmm.
And it kept me awake at night. Like this was something I knew would not go away. And so I started to really look into technology specifically because what I thought was really interesting about technology and careers in technology is that we were starting to see people who would pursue careers in software development and engineering that didn't need formal degrees. They could teach themselves skills using resources that they found on the internet. So we had, there were the online courses that became really popular. There were lots of boot camps that became popular. And so I thought, okay, I am a mom and I'm full time at this job. And I was working overtime because I was the store manager. However, I knew that if I could set aside certain hours of the morning and the evening, that I could start pursuing skills related to a future career in technology. And maybe in that way, I could get closer to what I had dreamed of for myself. And so I kind of settled. I said, okay, maybe I won't do physics. I won't get to do physics. And this hurt me, but I tried to push it aside. Maybe I can work in software. And so I started teaching myself these technical skills. And at one point, I was able to make the move from Starbucks to a local software company where I actually started in payroll. But I thought, that's great. I'll get my start in payroll, but I'm going to learn everything about the technology that they use in-house so that I can position myself. So if there is an opening on the other side of this company in the tech departments, then maybe I have a chance. And so at one point, I was able to make the move from payroll over to IT support and client implementation. And while I was in that role, I started to teach myself more skills around data analytics because I saw that data analysis was becoming increasingly important in across domains, which we've definitely seen with the emergence of, or the acceleration of AI technologies. And so from there, I went to work at a data science company. And I actually was a solutions engineer. And so I had this engineering title. I was very financially independent. It was a great job on paper. And I told myself I should be happy because I went from one place to here, but I wasn't. I thought about physics all the time. I wrote about it all the time. And so I had also started this habit of writing daily. And I realized that I always came back to writing about concepts in physics. And I thought, man, if I could just really put these two pieces together of writing and physics, then I would be so happy. And so at one point, I made the decision to leave my engineering career and pursue quantum because I became very interested in quantum computing as it was this combination of computation, but also quantum information. And I thought that was really interesting. And this is something I could love. And I thought, okay, I could put myself back through school. And in roughly, I don't know, 5+ years from that point in time, I could have an advanced degree and then I could go into the quantum industry. Or I could see if my previous strategy of teaching myself a skill set works in this instance. And so I started learning about quantum computing myself by reading resources that I found online that were readily available and also textbooks. And I started writing the Daily Qubit newsletter. That's how it began. It was really a way for me to teach myself about quantum computing through the act of writing. And I thought I'll make it public, and if anyone is interested, they can read about it. And that really grew from an experiment, what was an experiment at the time, to where I am now, which is actively working in the quantum field.
Absolutely, utmost respect. And Sierra, you are like a qubit, very fluid, reacting to the changing conditions, adapting. So really, I have a lot of respect, and I cannot not ask, what would you say to young girls if they encounter like a barrier or a really difficult spot in life? How should they approach the difficult situations?
Yeah.
How their mental approach should be?
I think that the number one thing that I would like young women to really adopt and to say to themselves over and over again is that everything you need to be successful is already within you. You don't need external validation through formal credentials, through the opinions of others. None of those things matter. Everything you need is already within you. You already have the strength, you have the capability. It's just about applying yourself. And I think that there are a few things that are to guarantee success, honestly. I think it's three or four things. Let me list them off. It's consistency and discipline over long periods of time. And if you find something that you love and you approach it with consistency and discipline over long periods of time, you absolutely can be successful in whatever that thing is. But ultimately, you have to start with telling yourself that you are capable and you do not require the external validation. You already have everything you need.
So the bottom line would be you don't need a portal to a different dimension. You just need discipline and patience.
Absolutely.
Last question. You will be present during Women in Tech Summit that is taking place in Warsaw, 4th and 5th of June.
Yes, I will. And I am very much looking forward to being there, moderating a panel as well as being able to network with the other women who are present.
Anyone who comes can learn from your insight, both as for quantum physics and quantum computing, as also life and success. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Projekt Dziewczyny do nauki, zachęcanie kobiet do kariery badawczej w naukach technicznych i ścisłych, jest finansowany ze środków budżetu państwa przyznanych przez ministra nauki w ramach programu Społeczna Odpowiedzialność Nauki 2, popularyzacja nauki.